Picture this. You're driving home after a weekend at the range, legally armed, completely within your rights as an American citizen. Red and blue lights flash behind you, minor traffic violation, maybe a broken taillight, maybe you forgot to signal. The cop approaches your window, and within minutes, your firearm is in his hands, he's running the serial number, and suddenly, you're in handcuffs because some database says your legally purchased weapon was reported stolen 3 years ago due to a clerical error your son witnessed from the back seat. Your constitutional rights just evaporated on the side of a highway, and here's the question nobody in power wants you asking. Was any of that legal? Can cops actually run the serial number on your gun during a routine traffic stop? Or is this just another example of law enforcement trampling the Fourth Amendment while hiding behind the magic words, officer safety? Because what's happening right now on American streets is a systematic dismantling of your rights, one traffic stop at a time. And if you don't understand exactly where the law stands and where it fails you, you're one interaction away from becoming another statistic in a system that treats legal gun owners like criminals until proven otherwise. And before we go any further, if you care about protecting your constitutional rights, if you believe Americans deserve to know when government authority crosses the line, hit that subscribe button right now because this channel exists to expose exactly what institutions don't want you understanding. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever been pulled over while carrying and whether the cops tried running your serial number. Let's build a record of how often this actually happens. Now let's break down the constitutional crisis unfolding every single day on American highways. Let me tell you about Tom. Regular guy, responsible gun owner, father. One evening, he's driving home after picking up his son from baseball practice when police pull him over for failing to signal a lane change. Standard traffic stop. The officer approaches, starts talking, and asks if Tom has any weapons in the vehicle. Tom does exactly what he's supposed to do in his state. He admits yes, he's carrying concealed, and he has a valid permit. The officer asks him to step out of the car. Tom complies. The officer retrieves the handgun, walks back to his cruiser, and runs the serial number. Moments later, Tom is face down on the pavement, hands behind his back, while his 12-year-old son watches from the passenger seat as his father gets arrested. The charge? Possession of a stolen firearm. Except the gun wasn't stolen, it had never been stolen. Tom purchased it legally years earlier from a private seller, all paperwork in order, completely legitimate transaction. What happened was a clerical error. Someone at some department somewhere entered the wrong serial number into a database. And now Tom's getting hauled off to jail while his son sits terrified in a vehicle on the side of the road, watching police treat his father like a criminal. Think about the absolute nightmare of that moment. Think about what that does to a child's perception of justice, of police, of whether his father actually did something wrong. Think about the humiliation, the fear, the violation of being arrested for a crime you didn't commit because some cop decided to extend a traffic stop beyond its legal scope to run a serial number check without probable cause. Tom's charges eventually got dropped, sure, but not before he spent a night in jail, not before he paid thousands in legal fees, not before his son had nightmares about his dad being taken away. And here's what should make every American's blood boil. The entire arrest stemmed from an action that may have been completely unconstitutional from the start. Because when we dig into Supreme Court precedent, when we actually examine what the law says versus what police do on the street, there's a massive gap, and citizens are falling through it every single day. The United States Supreme Court ruled in United States v. Robinson that armed individuals, whether carrying legally or illegally, pose a greater safety risk to officers. Courts have used this reasoning to justify allowing police to detain citizens and temporarily seize firearms during traffic stops under the banner of officer safety. And look, nobody's arguing that police don't face genuine danger during traffic stops. Nobody's saying officers shouldn't be able to take reasonable precautions, but here's where it gets twisted. What starts as securing a weapon for safety purposes morphs into a full investigative procedure, where cops are now running serial numbers, checking databases, extending the stop far beyond the original violation. They're turning a broken taillight stop into a criminal investigation of a legal gun owner. And they're doing it by exploiting a doctrine that was meant to protect officers, not to create fishing expeditions into whether your legally owned property might be connected to a crime. And this is where Supreme Court precedent should protect you, but often doesn't. In Rodriguez v. United States, the Supreme Court made it crystal clear: police cannot extend a traffic stop beyond the time necessary to handle the original reason for the stop. If you got pulled over for speeding, the cop can check your license, write the ticket, and that's it. Any extension beyond that time frame without reasonable suspicion of another crime constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment. The court was explicit about this. They drew a line. They said you cannot use a traffic stop as a pretext to conduct fishing expeditions into unrelated matters. So if running a serial number on your gun takes an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes, and the officer has no specific articulable reason to believe that particular firearm is connected to a crime, that extension violates Rodriguez. It's that simple. Except it's not simple, because courts across this country are allowing it to happen anyway. Now combine that with Arizona v. Hicks, another Supreme Court case that should absolutely apply here. Police responded to a shooting, entered an apartment, and noticed expensive stereo equipment that looked out of place. Suspecting it was stolen, they moved the equipment to see the serial numbers, wrote them down, and later discovered the equipment was indeed stolen. The Supreme Court ruled that moving the stereo equipment to view the serial numbers constituted a separate search requiring independent probable cause. The officers couldn't just manipulate someone's property on a hunch. They needed specific justification. So if cops can't move a stereo to check a serial number without probable cause, how exactly is it constitutional for them to manipulate your firearm, picking it up, turning it over, examining the serial number, during a traffic stop when they have no specific reason to believe that gun is stolen? How does that pass constitutional scrutiny? The answer is, it shouldn't. But it's happening every day because courts are giving police a pass on Fourth Amendment violations when firearms are involved, and the justification they're using is the same tired excuse they always use: officer safety. Here's what the Plainview Doctrine actually means under constitutional law. If a police officer can see something illegal in plain view, and I mean truly in plain view, no manipulation required, no moving objects around, no picking things up to examine them, then yes, that evidence can be seized without a warrant. The key phrase is immediately apparent. If a cop walks up to your car window during a traffic stop and sees a brick of cocaine sitting on your passenger seat, that's plain view. It's visible, it's obviously contraband, no search required, but plain view doesn't give police the right to start manipulating objects to find something that might be illegal. If that serial number isn't visible from where the officer is standing, if he has to pick up your gun, rotate it, examine it to find the number, that's a search. That requires justification. That requires probable cause beyond, I want to check if this legal firearm might possibly be connected to a crime somewhere. Let me tell you about Maria. Single mother, works as a security guard, late-night shifts, drives home through neighborhoods that aren't always safe. She legally carries a firearm for protection. One night she gets pulled over because her rear license plate light is out. Minor equipment violation. She's in a duty-to-inform state, so when the officer approaches, she immediately discloses that she has a firearm in the vehicle, exactly as the law requires. The officer asks her to step out. She complies. He retrieves the weapon. And then, without asking permission, without probable cause, without any indication whatsoever that Maria has committed a crime beyond a broken light bulb, he runs the serial number. Maria felt violated. She felt like she did everything right. Disclosed the weapon, followed the law, cooperated fully, and still got treated like a suspect. When she contacted me, she asked the exact right question. Was this legal? Because it didn't feel legal. It felt like harassment dressed up as procedure. And here's the crucial part that every gun owner needs to understand. This doesn't play out the same way in every state. If you're in Texas, where Maria was stopped, the Motorist Protection Act allows you to carry a concealed firearm in your vehicle without a license, provided you're not committing a crime. No DWI, no drug possession, nothing beyond a Class C misdemeanor traffic ticket. Texas law is relatively protective of gun owners in this context, but cross the border into California, New York, New Jersey, and you're in a completely different legal universe. In those states, the mere presence of a firearm can trigger immediate arrest. The standards are stricter, the penalties are harsher, and police have far more latitude to turn a traffic stop into a criminal investigation. So whether running your serial number is legal or not depends partly on geography, which is insane when we're talking about constitutional rights. The Fourth Amendment doesn't change when you cross state lines. Your protection against unreasonable searches shouldn't evaporate because you're driving through a different jurisdiction. But that's exactly what's happening, and it's creating a patchwork system where your rights depend on zip codes instead of constitutional principles. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room: officer safety. Those two words have become the ultimate trump card for law enforcement. Courts have repeatedly held that because traffic stops are inherently dangerous for police, officers are granted broader authority to secure their safety. In Pennsylvania versus Mims, the Supreme Court ruled that cops can legally require you to exit your vehicle if they can articulate a specific reason related to officer safety. Many courts have extended that logic to allow officers to temporarily detain your firearm during the stop. And again, on its face, that's not unreasonable. If an officer feels genuinely threatened, if there's a legitimate safety concern, temporarily securing a weapon makes sense. But here's where it breaks down. Securing a weapon for safety is not the same thing as investigating that weapon. Taking your gun and setting it on the roof of the cruiser while the stop is conducted, that's securing it. Taking your gun back to the patrol car, running the serial number through multiple databases, extending the stop by 15 minutes while you sit on the curb, that's not officer safety anymore. That's a criminal investigation without probable cause, and it violates everything Rodriguez versus United States established about time limits on traffic stops. If you're a Second Amendment supporter, if you believe in both gun rights and constitutional rights, this should infuriate you because what we're watching is a systematic exploitation of officer safety concerns to justify warrantless searches that would never be tolerated in any other context. Imagine if cops could extend traffic stops to run the VIN on your car stereo just to make sure it wasn't stolen. Imagine if they could search your phone to make sure you weren't texting while driving. People would lose their minds. But when it's a firearm, suddenly courts bend over backwards to accommodate police overreach, and the justification is always the same. We need to make sure officers go home safe at night, and that's a worthy goal. Nobody wants cops getting hurt, but officer safety cannot be a blank check to violate the Fourth Amendment. It cannot be a magic phrase that erases constitutional protections. Because if it is, then you don't really have rights. You have privileges that disappear the moment law enforcement decides they're inconvenient. So where does this leave you, the legal gun owner trying to navigate an increasingly hostile system? How do you protect yourself when the law is murky, when courts are inconsistent, when your rights depend on which judge hears your case and which state you're driving through? First and most important, never consent to a search unless you are legally required to disclose that you're carrying a firearm. If you're in a duty-to-inform state and you have a permit, yes, you must tell the officer you're armed. But beyond that mandatory disclosure, you are under no obligation to volunteer information or consent to searches. If the cop asks, "Do you have any weapons in the car?" and you're not in a duty-to-inform state, you can decline to answer. If he asks, "Can I search your vehicle?" you can politely but firmly say, "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. Am I free to go?" You will not look guilty for refusing consent. Refusing consent is your constitutional right, and exercising your rights is not evidence of criminal behavior, no matter what cops try to tell you. Here's the reality. The moment a police officer discovers you have a firearm, the entire dynamic of that traffic stop changes. Suddenly, he's not just writing a speeding ticket, he's running mental checklists. Do I smell alcohol? Does this person seem nervous? Are they making furtive movements? Could this be a DWI situation? Any paraphernalia visible? The presence of a gun escalates everything because it gives officers an excuse to dig deeper, to extend the stop, to search for any secondary justification to make an arrest. And once they arrest you for DWI or drug possession or any other charge, they can now justify seizing your weapon as evidence or claiming you were unlawfully carrying while intoxicated. Don't invite that trouble into your life. Start from a position of protecting your rights, not trying to be the cop's best friend. Compliance with lawful orders? Absolutely. Volunteering information or consenting to searches? Absolutely not. And listen, we need to be clear-eyed about this. If you're carrying a firearm and an officer asks if you have a weapon and you're legally required to disclose, do not lie. Do not hide it. Do not reach for it. The number of people who get shot during traffic stops because they move toward a gun, even to retrieve their permit, is staggering. If you must disclose, keep your hands visible, speak clearly, move slowly, and let the officer control the situation. Tell him where the gun is located. Tell him you have a permit. Do not reach for anything without explicit instruction. If the officer wants to retrieve the weapon himself, let him. Your ego is not worth your life. Your desire to prove you're one of the good guys is not worth getting shot because a nervous cop misinterpreted your movements. This is about survival first, constitutional challenges second. If an officer demands to see your firearm and run the serial number, you can ask questions. You can ask, "Am I being detained?" You can ask, "Do you have probable cause to search my property?" You can state clearly, "I do not consent to any searches." But if the officer is unreasonable, if he's demanding access and escalating the situation, do not physically resist. Comply under protest. Move slowly. Ask the officer to retrieve the weapon himself. Document everything. And here's something I cannot stress enough. Record the interaction if your state allows it. Most states permit you to record police during traffic stops. Turn on your phone's camera, capture audio and video, get the officer's badge number, get the time and location, because when this ends up in court, and if your rights were violated, it should end up in court, your recording is going to be worth more than anything the officer writes in his report. Police reports are written to justify police actions. Your video shows what actually happened. Now here's the most powerful thing you can do during a traffic stop that's turning into an interrogation. Let's say you got pulled over for speeding. The officer should write you a ticket and send you on your way, but instead he's asking if you have guns in the car. He's asking to search the vehicle. He's taking 5, 10, 15 minutes asking questions that have nothing to do with why you were pulled over. At that point, you can say this, and I want you to memorize it. "Officer, I exercise my right to remain silent. I refuse to answer any questions without my lawyer present. Am I free to go?" That is your line in the sand. That is you invoking constitutional protections explicitly and unambiguously. The officer cannot legally extend the traffic stop beyond the time necessary to handle the original violation unless he has reasonable suspicion of another crime. If he keeps you there anyway, if he continues questioning, if he runs your serial number after you've invoked your rights, that creates a much stronger case that everything he did after that point was unconstitutional and should be suppressed in court. And if this sounds overly aggressive, if it sounds like I'm teaching you to be combative with police, understand this. I'm teaching you to assert rights that exist on paper but get trampled on the street every single day. I'm teaching you to create a legal record that protects you when law enforcement oversteps. Because here's the unfortunate truth. If you don't assert your rights clearly and explicitly, courts will assume you waived them. If you don't object to the extended stop, if you don't refuse consent, if you just sit there and let the cop do whatever he wants because you figure cooperating will make it go faster, You are giving up your ability to challenge that stop later. Silence is not consent, but in the eyes of the law, passive compliance often gets treated like consent. So speak up, be polite but firm, document everything, and if your rights get violated, fight it in court with every tool at your disposal. Now, if you've made it this far, if you're someone who actually cares about understanding your rights instead of just hoping nothing bad happens, do me a favor and drop a comment right now. Tell me your state. Tell me if you carry. Tell me if you've ever had cops try to run your serial number during a traffic stop. Let's create a real database of how often this happens and where it's happening most. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel exists to give you the information that keeps you out of handcuffs and keeps government power in check. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because we're not done exposing how broken this system is. Here's the broader point that gets lost in all the legal nuance and case law citations. What we're watching is the slow erosion of the Fourth Amendment under the guise of public safety. Every time courts give police another exception, another carve-out, another justification to search without warrants or extend stops without cause, we lose a piece of constitutional protection that the founders considered essential to a free society. The Fourth Amendment exists because the founders lived under British rule where soldiers could search your home, seize your property, and arrest you without cause. They wrote the Fourth Amendment specifically to prevent that kind of tyranny, and now, 250 years later, we've got courts saying, well, yes, the Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches, but if you're carrying a gun, officer safety concerns override that protection. That's not a minor exception. That's a gaping hole in constitutional protection, and it's getting bigger every time a court sides with law enforcement over citizens. The reality is this: whether cops can legally run the serial number on your gun during a traffic stop depends on multiple factors. The specific circumstances of the stop, the state you're in, the court that hears your case, and whether the officer had probable cause or reasonable suspicion beyond just, this person has a gun. In states with strong gun rights protections, in circuits with judges who take the Fourth Amendment seriously, you might have a fighting chance to suppress evidence obtained through an illegal serial number check. In other jurisdictions, cops are going to be given broad latitude to investigate firearms under officer safety justifications, and your rights are going to take a backseat. That's the uncomfortable truth. Your constitutional protections are not uniform. They are not consistent. And they are under constant assault from a law enforcement culture that treats legal gun owners like potential criminals who just haven't been caught yet. So, what do you do with this information? You educate yourself on your state's specific laws. You understand duty to inform requirements. You know whether you're in a state that respects gun rights or one that criminalizes them. You assert your rights clearly when stopped. You document interactions. You refuse consent to searches. You move slowly and carefully when firearms are involved, and if your rights get violated, you fight back through the legal system instead of just accepting that this is how things are. Because if we don't push back, if we don't challenge unconstitutional stops, if we don't hold law enforcement accountable when they overstep, these violations will become standard procedure. They'll become so normalized that future generations won't even know they had rights to begin with. The question isn't whether you trust police. The question isn't whether you think most cops are good people trying to do a hard job. The question is whether you believe constitutional rights matter even when they're inconvenient for law enforcement. Because if rights only exist when they're easy to respect, they're not rights, they're suggestions. And the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment are not suggestions. They are the backbone of a free society, and they are under attack every single day on American streets during routine traffic stops where legal gun owners get treated like criminals because they exercise their right to bear arms. That should terrify you. That should motivate you to learn your rights, assert your rights, and defend your rights with the same intensity that those rights were written into the Constitution in the first place. Because nobody else is going to do it for you. Not the courts, not the police, not the politicians. Just you, standing on the side of the road with a cop demanding to run your serial number, and you need to know exactly what to say and exactly what not to say in that moment, or you're going to end up like Tom, arrested over a clerical error while your kid watches from the back seat, learning that in America, doing everything right doesn't always protect you from a system that's rigged against constitutional rights when law enforcement decides those rights are inconvenient. So, subscribe to this channel if you want more content like this. Content that doesn't sugarcoat reality. Content that tells you what you actually need to know instead of what makes institutions comfortable. Comment below with your experiences. Share this video with every gun owner you know who needs to understand how easily a routine traffic stop can turn into a constitutional nightmare. And most importantly, educate yourself. Assert your rights, and never assume that just because you're following the law, you're protected from a system that increasingly treats lawful gun ownership as probable cause for investigation. The fight for your rights doesn't happen in legislatures or courtrooms alone. It happens every single day on the side of the road when you refuse to consent, when you invoke your rights, when you document police overreach, and when you hold the system accountable for violations that should never have happened in the first place.